The Podium Pod is brought to you by The Pick and Roll. Head to pickandroll.com.au and subscribe for in-depth commentary and analysis on Aussie hoops. We're also brought to you by FBL, Fantasy Ballers League, an Australian baller lifestyle brand that aims to provide you with classics on and off the court. FBL makes a bold statement in its distinctive white, black and gold colours, with products ranging from basketball shoes to apparel, accessories and more. Be bold with gold. Check out the FBL collection at fblsport.com today. And don't miss the 2023 FIBA World Cup, with all 82 games brought to you live and exclusively across ESPN, ESPN2 and the ESPN app. Plus, all Boomers games, Team USA games and finals will be available on ESPN via KO freebies at no charge. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Podium Pod, the podcast covering the 2023 FIBA World Cup, currently only in the Philippines with just 4 games for Chocolates left in the tournament, the 2 semifinals, the final, and the third place game. This episode, we're going to preview the semifinals, and I'm joined once again by the Pick and Roll and Clutch Radio's Jacob Dull. Jacob, 2 massive semifinals and intriguing games between 2 dominant sides taking on teams that could knock them off if they have the right night.
Yeah, I think it's lined up really nicely here for the semi-finals. As you say, the US and Canada, clearly the most talented teams in this tournament, but they now face Serbia and Germany respectively, who have shown enough, I think, to show that they could really challenge them. So this is going to be a fun finish to the tournament.
So Serbia faced Canada in the first semi-final. Serbia led by Bogdanovic, who's averaging nearly 19 points a game, 3 rebounds, about 5 assists, a couple of steals as well. Nikola Jovic has also played sort of some cameo roles for Serbia along the journey as well. They've been really consistently great, except for that really narrow loss to Italy. They deserve to be in this position, and they've been extremely strong all tournament long, as they always are. It's just all the more impressive because they're lacking the NBA MVP, Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, and they've proven to have a lot more depth than I'm sure a lot of people would have given them credit for coming into the tournament. And as you mentioned, that loss to Italy, that's the only mark on their record, and all of these teams now have had a loss like that along the way. So they're in a really good spot, I think. Serbia, they're the second leading scoring team left at this tournament. Bogdanovic, as you say, has been the star, and in their quarterfinal, he had 18 points at halftime and really just put them out to a big lead against Lithuania. So he'll be super important again. Nikola Jovic a bit quieter, but he's shown what he can do. Filip Petrusev had some good games as well. So they've got a lot of scorers on this team, a lot of firepower, and I think Canada are definitely going to have their hands full, particularly on the perimeter.
Nikola Milutinov is the leading efficiency player in the game for Serbia. He averages 13 points a game and nearly 9 rebounds as well. They really overwhelmed Lithuania in that quarterfinal, and Lithuania were coming off that victory against the US. Everyone thought that they would go from strength to strength, but they never really looked like it against Serbia. Serbia pulled away in the second quarter, and that was all she wrote. So extremely strong team. And speaking of extremely strong, Canada have been strong all tournament long, except for an inexplicable loss to Brazil. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is averaging 25 points, 7 rebounds and 5 assists to go with nearly 2 steals. Dylan Brooks is probably the other one to talk through. He, doesn't necessarily hit the stat sheet in a strong fashion, but he antagonized Luka Doncic to the point where Luka picked up 2 technical fouls in the quarterfinals, and that, could very well have been the difference between those 2 teams. So he plays his role. Not everyone likes the type of role that he plays. He's a pest, as we would call them in the NBL. But for this team, he plays a very valuable role.
And there's plenty of talk after that quarterfinal against Slovenia about the officiating, Luka Doncic making his feelings very clear during and after the game. But Lou Dort and Dylan Brooks, as you say, did such a good job of just hassling and harassing Luka Doncic. Canada's team was the best possible matchup in this tournament for Doncic. And I think they're a similarly good matchup for Serbia because they do have these defenders that they can throw at. Nikola Jovic, they can throw at Bogdanovic, and they're probably not going to keep them out of the game for the full 40 minutes, but they're going to blunt their impact to some degree. And it'll be interesting to see how Serbia can respond, where they can find some other contributions, because I do think Canada just have so much depth, so many athletes on this roster that can keep them quiet even with their prolific scoring today.
Just on their quarterfinal matchup, there were a lot of free throws for SGA in the second half. What did you view the officiating performance as during that game? Because Luka was obviously really frustrated. You were there. Did you see questionable calls in the second half in Canada's favour, or do you think they were all there?
It's hard to say in the stadium a lot of times without the benefit of replays. I know Luka was definitely getting a lot of contact on Slovenia's offensive end and not getting too many calls. So whether there were fouls there or not is up for debate. But I think SGA, he is just so hard to stop without fouling. Like from where I saw it, he was just picking his way through traffic so easily, getting past two, three defenders on the perimeter. And eventually someone just had to stick a hand in and foul him. And
Yeah.
from where I was, it looked like he was drawing that contact because there's just no other way to stop him once he gets downhill and gets a full head of steam. So he, I think, from that one game is the most impressive player I've watched at this tournament. And I'm not convinced Serbia have a way to stop him. And especially given he can sort of set up his teammates if the defense collapses on him. I think he's just the perfect player for this kind of game.
And one other stat to float, Serbia is shooting nearly 68% from the field on 2-point shots, which is just an obscene number. And Canada just have to do a really good job of protecting and limiting Serbia's ability to get high quality shots, because it seems like they're just at another level in this tournament.
Yeah, and they're doing that without that really dominant post presence or that dominant big like Jokic would have been if he was there. They don't have that, and they're still getting all these really good quality looks inside the arc. And that's really just from their ball movement. They've got so many shooters on this team that force a hard closeout. They just keep the ball swinging, and eventually the defense makes a mistake. So, as I said before, they're second in points. They're also second in assists per game at this tournament. So, just a really well-oiled machine if they can get rolling.
Who's your final tip? Who's going to win, Canada or Serbia?
I think it has to be Canada. I think they've got so much more depth than even I gave them credit for coming in.
Yeah.
SGA gets the headlines, but they go to their bench and they've got guys like Lou Dort, Nikhil Alexander Walker, NBA players and pretty good NBA players coming in to make an impact. So I think the talent gap is going to be a bit too much, and they are playing some really good basketball too.
And with some really, really good talent to come in for the Olympics potentially in 12 months' time as well. Speaking of that, I think if Serbia can manage to get to the final, then they've put the rest of the world on notice for that gold medal in Paris, because they'll be probably more than likely adding the reigning, two-time MVP and finals MVP Nikola Jokic to this lineup, which is just obscene to think about with the talent that they've been able to put out there, and the effort and execution that they've been able to show has been next level. For me, I have to tip Canada. I'll go with the best player on the floor, SGA. He's probably my leader in the clubhouse for MVP. He was my pick before the tournament. And I think Canada will get over Serbia, but it will be a close game. I can see this being very close and very uncomfortable for Canada, but you're right. I think they've got the defenders to get over the top of Serbia. The other semi-final, the US are obviously featuring. They will face Germany, a team that we've seen up close and personal, and you've seen in Okinawa on a series of occasions. So you know this German team really well. We'll start with the US team. As usual, they're very balanced right down the stat sheet. Anthony Edwards has been their leading scorer, but they've had strong contributions from the likes of Austin Reeves, Jalen Brunson, Tyrese Halliburton, Mikal Bridges, Paolo Banchero off the bench as well. Jaren Jackson Jr. is playing some good ball, but not the strongest side that we've seen the US field. And they, of course, lost to Lithuania. They made a statement against Italy, but they're still not absolute favourites to win the whole thing, in my view. I think Canada have been more impressive, and Germany have been really impressive across this tournament. What do you think about the play of the US team to date? And Do you think they're the absolute clear far and away favourite to win this whole thing?
I don't think they're far and away favourite. I think they are the favourite still, but it's maybe a narrower margin than we're used to seeing for the
Yeah.
US teams of old. It was my first time seeing them in person at the tournament in their quarterfinal against Italy, and it's a little bit hard to get a read from that game because Italy were just so overmatched. But at the same time, that's full credit to the US. They were just ruthless in that game. And I think what impressed me the most was there's all this talk about their smaller front court. They don't have real big depth and how that affects them defensively, but they just swarm on the perimeter. You know, they have so much length, all these athletes on the perimeter. Italy struggled to even get the ball into the paint because they were just absolutely hassled and harassed nonstop. And the US did a really good job defensively there. So I do still think they should be the favourites to win this semi-final and to win the tournament. But as you say, it's not a perfect team. They don't have those bigs on the interior, and Germany will be a much bigger test in the semi-final.
And Germany have the thing that the US don't have, which is size and the potential for rebounding. I mean, the US is winning the rebounding battle overall in this tournament between these two teams. But you look at Daniel Tice and you look at Mo and Franz Wagner and even Thyman. They're going to have everything that they can handle on the boards. So the US will need to try and win that battle and also limit the other guy who's probably in contention for MVP of the tournament, Dennis Schroeder. He had a terrible quarterfinal matchup. I think he shot well below his average and even put out an Instagram post afterwards to kind of say what was all that about. But he's been scintillating in different parts of this tournament and unstoppable, as has his compatriot Lowe as well. I mean, both of those guys, Australia found it extremely difficult to be able to stop on the perimeter. But that mix of size and speed is one that the US is going to have to contend with. It's not going to be easy.
Yeah, he's such a tough matchup. And when the Boomers played Germany, they kind of dared him to make shots, and he did make shots, and he finished with 30 points. Latvia in the quarterfinal did something similar, played back really deep off him and forced him to shoot from the perimeter. And it worked. He shot 4 of 26 from the field. He was 0 of 8 from 3. It was as bad a game as I think he will ever play. And they still won. I think that
Yeah.
says a lot about this German team. And the fact that they can add Franz Wagner back in at this late point of the tournament, he only played in their first game and he's been sidelined ever since. They get him back, and suddenly there's a little bit less pressure on Dennis Schroeder to do everything. He can have a down game, and they can still win. That might not be the case against the US. Obviously, that's a whole different ball game matching up with them. But there is some really good depth of talent on this German team. They've got size at every position. They are, on paper, a really fun matchup against the United States.
And they'll probably deploy a guy like Isaac Bonga onto Anthony Edwards, I would say. And that's an interesting matchup in and of itself because, of course, every team tries to slow down Edwards. But with the lack of contributions from others in a significant fashion and the fact that Edwards had to win at least one game basically off his own back, that's a concern because if they're able to slow him down and limit his influence, then you're turning to guys that haven't had the greatest tournament. I think they'll be led, the US, by Brunson and Halliburton from a playmaking perspective. I think that's probably the most important thing to note, that if Edwards fails to get going, then they'll be looking to play really smart basketball, and they've got two guys at the point guard position that can find open teammates really easily and beyond the flashy passes, always make the right play. So that's in their favor, isn't it?
It is, and having those 2 point guards there just makes everything else run a lot more smoothly. You know, it's not always the smoothest process trying to get all these NBA guys to mesh, but I think Halliburton in particular has done a really good job of keeping everyone involved while dictating the pace of the play. And the thing about this US team is Anthony Edwards is clearly their best scorer, their most talented scorer, but they have got a lot of guys who can have a big game, have a couple of big games. You know, the other day in the quarterfinal, it was Mikal Bridges and Halliburton himself who were knocking down shots. Austin Reeves has had some good games. You know, Jalen Brunson, Paolo Banchero, Brandon Ingram. They've got scorers. They're not all clicking at the same time yet, but they only need one or two of them to get going, and it's very tough for any of these other teams to stop them.
Question: who would you send to Schroeder? from the US starting lineup?
Oh, it's a tough
Not
one,
easy.
isn't it?
Because
Whether they back
conventional
in,
wisdom suggests that maybe Brunson or Halliburton, when he's off the bench, point guard on point guard matchup, but he's that lethal that do you send Bridges? Do you send Josh Hart to him?
it's definitely something they would consider. I think then the problem is now with Franz Wagner back, you
Yeah.
need a bit of size and length to guard him. So normally I would say Bridges is the matchup for Schroeder because it was shown against Latvia that if you have that really long defender on him with the size advantage, they can sit a bit deeper and still contest his shots. But I think Bridges will probably be tied up with Franz Wagner. So maybe it is a Josh Hart who goes to Schroeder. He's still got that little bit of size and the quickness to go with him. But Schroeder's one of those guys. It's hard to find a perfect matchup for him. There's very few players who can actually stay in front of him all the time. So it'll be a tough decision for Steve Kerr and his staff to make going into this game.
So I think the tip for me is pretty clear. I think the US are going to march through to the gold medal game. I am hoping that it is the USA versus Canada, probably because I see that as the toughest matchup for this US team. And a game where the US wouldn't actually have the best player on the floor, which would be probably the first game all tournament where that was the case in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So for me, I think the US are going to beat Germany, but it will be close at least for a portion of proceedings. Jacob, do you agree?
I do. A part of me wants to go against the grain and pick Germany because I do think this German team is super good and playing really well. But the US are just a little bit too strong, I think. So I'll draw the line at saying it'll be the US, but by less than 5 points. I think this is going to be a really good game. I think this will be the game of the tournament so far, and it's going to be fun to watch.
I would love to see Germany win for no other reason than they beat the Boomers, and at least we can take some solace in the fact that we were beaten by a team that made it right through to the last stage of the tournament.
The classic Socceroos argument, oh, we lost to the champions, so that means we must be the second best team.
Exactly. You're picking up what I'm putting down. Jacob, enjoy the semi-finals and the rest of the tournament. We'll see you when there's only 2 teams remaining that can win this gold medal and the Naismith Trophy.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening to the Podium Pod. We'll see you again next time.